First, I'm going to remind you that potassium is mainly an intracellular ion, and that the distribution of potassium across the cell wall creates a membrane potential, and that this membrane potential has to be closely regulated. We'll learn that the kidney controls total potassium balance, and that the handling of potassium by the kidney is quite unusual. Most of the filtered potassium is reabsorbed in the proximal tubule and the thick ascending limb, and it's the secretion of potassium into the collecting duct that usually controls potassium excretion. Now, when potassium is deficient, the collecting duct can actually reabsorb more potassium. So the kidney is very flexible, but under normal circumstances, the amount of potassium excreted in the urine is determined by the amount secreted in the collecting duct. This potassium secretion occurs in the principal cells, and it's controlled by how much potassium is within the cell, by how permeable the luminal membrane of the principal cell is to potassium, how negative the lumen of the collecting duct is, and also what the potassium concentration is in the lumen. The major physiologic regulator of potassium secretion and excretion is the steroid hormone aldosterone, a mineralocorticoid made by the adrenal gland. When acid-base balance changes, this can have unintended consequences both on the distribution of potassium between the inside and outside of the cell, and also on potassium excretion. This slide is from the early body fluid lectures and just serves to remind you that most of the potassium is intracellular. Plasma potassium concentration is quite low. In fact, only about 2% of the total body potassium is extracellular. So that means that there's a very high concentration gradient for the diffusion of potassium out of cells. Remember, the high potassium inside the cell is maintained by the sodium-potassium ATPase, but most cells have potassium channels in their wall which allow passive outward diffusion of potassium down a concentration gradient. As this positively charged potassium leaves the cell, it leaves the inside of the membrane negative. That creates a membrane potential. So the passive diffusion of potassium out of all cells creates a membrane potential, which is negative on the interior of the cell. This is particularly important for excitable tissues, which have a resting membrane potential. These are nerve and muscle. In order for a nerve to fire or a muscle to contract, the membrane has to depolarize, and the level of the resting membrane potential will determine how easy or difficult it is to depolarize the membrane and elicit a response. When plasma potassium levels fall, the diffusion gradient for potassium across the cell wall is increased, so the interior of the cell becomes more negative and the cell hyperpolarizes. When a muscle cell membrane hyperpolarizes, it becomes more difficult to make it contract, and in this situation you will see a state known as flaccid paralysis. If the respiratory muscles and the heart can't contract, this of course is life-threatening. On the other hand, when there's too much potassium in the plasma, this reduces the outward diffusion of potassium, so the membrane becomes less negative. It partially depolarizes. And when a muscle is partially depolarized, it makes it much easier to contract. So in hyperkalemia, where the muscle membrane is partially depolarized, we get a state referred to as spastic contraction. That is uncontrolled contracture of various muscles. And of course, in the case of the heart, this will cause arrest in systole. So it's clear that maintenance of the distribution of potassium inside and outside the cell is absolutely critical. So we eat potassium every day in our diet. We should have a reasonably high intake of potassium, and most of that gets absorbed through the gut and goes into the circulation. Now, if a large amount of potassium is taken into the circulation, it will of course derange the ratio of the intracellular to extracellular potassium concentration. So in order to prevent this, there are a number of mechanisms which occur as soon as plasma potassium goes up, which causes potassium to move into the cell. The most important is insulin. I know we always talk about insulin in terms of control of glucose uptake, but insulin is also extremely important in causing uptake of potassium into cells after a meal. Beta-adrenergic activity also moves potassium into cells, as does aldosterone. So all of these are physiologic mechanisms which are activated very rapidly to maintain the balance between extracellular and intracellular potassium, and thus to maintain the membrane potential. We can also see dysregulation of the distribution of potassium across the cell membrane in a number of situations. Alpha-adrenergic stimulation will cause potassium to leave the cell. That will raise plasma potassium concentration. And this occurs in exercise, in which the alpha-adrenergic nerves are stimulated. This isn't usually a problem in normal people, but can be a problem in people, for example, on beta blockers or people who have an impaired insulin response. Changes in acid-base balance will change the distribution of potassium across the cell wall. This is actually part of the body's acid-base balance mechanism, and I'll talk about that more in a later lecture. When the pH of the extracellular fluid increases, that means there's less hydrogen ion in the extracellular fluid than there should be. Hydrogen ion will leave the cell to try and bring the pH back to normal, and a potassium, which is also positively charged, will enter the cell. So when the body fluids are alkaline, you will see hypokalemia develop, which will lead to hyperpolarization of excitable tissue. When cells break and when plasma osmolality increases, potassium is released from the cells into the extracellular fluid and plasma potassium increases. Here we see hyperkalemia, which leads to depolarization of excitable tissue. Then there are a range of drugs which can also influence the distribution of potassium across the cell. Any drugs that inhibit the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system will cause hyperkalemia. So will potassium-sparing diuretics and beta blockers. Hypokalemia will occur when people are on potassium-wasting diuretics, and, for example, when they're receiving beta-adrenergic agonists for treatment of asthma. So there are a lot of situations in which the distribution of potassium across the cell wall can become accidentally unbalanced, and these can be very serious and lead to life-threatening consequences quite quickly. The total amount of potassium in the body is controlled over the long term by the kidney. There is a little bit of fecal loss of potassium. It's usually quite small. It can be increased when potassium intake is high, but the vast majority of control of potassium balance is by the kidney. The way the kidney handles potassium is quite unusual. Remember, there's not much potassium in the extracellular fluid, so the amount of potassium filtered at the glomerulus is relatively small. Of that potassium, most of what's filtered gets reabsorbed in the proximal tubule, and almost all the rest gets reabsorbed from the thick ascending limb of the loop of Henle. There is a little bit of recycling, and we'll discuss that in a minute. But by the time fluid leaves the thick ascending limb of the loop of Henle, about 90% of the filtered potassium has been reabsorbed. Under normal circumstances, the amount of potassium being excreted in the urine is determined by how much potassium is secreted into the collecting duct. However, if the body needs to retain potassium, different cells in the collecting duct are capable of reabsorbing more potassium. Because most of the filtered potassium is always reabsorbed in the proximal tubule and thick ascending limb, the excretion of potassium is independent of filtration rate, and that's quite different to most other substances that we've talked about. Under normal circumstances, the amount of potassium excreted is determined by events in the collecting duct. Now, we have to be careful here when we're looking at potassium with the fractional clearance concept. I talked to you earlier on in the clearance lecture about how we compare the clearance of a substance like sodium or glucose or phosphate to the clearance of inulin. They're all freely filtered substances, and that gives us an index of how much of that substance is being reabsorbed in the tubule. Now, the fractional clearance of potassium is usually 1, but that camouflages the fact that most of the potassium appearing in the final urine gets there by secretion. In herbivores, animals that are on a very high potassium intake, the fractional clearance of potassium actually is greater than 1, giving evidence of net potassium secretion. But we don't talk about the fractional clearance of potassium because the way the kidney handles potassium makes it too difficult to interpret. So first, let's consider what happens in normal or high potassium intake states. There's always reabsorption of potassium in the proximal tubule and the thick ascending limb. On a normal potassium intake, the fluid arriving in the distal tubule only contains about 10% of the filtered potassium. The final determination of how much potassium is in the urine is determined how much is secreted in the collecting ducts via the principal cells. Let's look at the tubule transport processes that are involved. In the thick ascending limb, the NKCC2, the sodium potassium 2 chloride transporter, is very active. This is responsible for reabsorbing probably about 20% of the filtered potassium. Some of that potassium leaves the peritubular side of the cell by this potassium chloride co-transporter. Some of it's returned into the cell, and some of this potassium diffuses back across the luminal membrane through the ROM-K channel. Remember, we're reabsorbing a lot of sodium by this NKCC2 transporter, and there's not much potassium in the lumen because most of the potassium is in the cell. So this recycling provides a constant supply of potassium so that the NKCC2 transporter can continue working. In the principal cell, there's a luminal potassium channel which allows the outward diffusion of potassium from the cell into the lumen. When potassium is in short supply, again, we see reabsorption of potassium in the proximal tubule and thick ascending limb, and continued reabsorption of potassium in the collecting duct. This now occurs in the other cell type, the intercalated cell. We haven't talked about those cells much. They're very important in acid-base balance. And you can see that when potassium needs to be reabsorbed from the collecting duct fluid in potassium deficiency, there's this potassium hydrogen ATPase which gets activated. Every time a hydrogen ion is secreted into the lumen, a potassium is reabsorbed. We'll talk much more about these processes when we talk about acid-base balance. But it's just important to know that the kidney has the capacity, if necessary, to reabsorb potassium in the collecting duct. However, under normal circumstances, potassium excretion is determined by the amount of potassium that is being secreted. So let's look at the principal cell and think about the process that's involved in moving potassium from the cell into the lumen so that it can be excreted in the urine. Potassium is moving passively down a concentration gradient, high inside the cell, low in the tubule lumen. So anything that increases intracellular potassium will promote potassium secretion. Anything that makes the membrane more permeable to potassium, i.e. more potassium channels, will increase potassium secretion. Anything that makes the intratubular potassium concentration lower will increase potassium secretion, all down a concentration gradient. In addition, potassium is a positively charged ion, and it's moving into a section of the tubule where the lumen has a negative charge. Anything that makes the lumen more negative will enhance the secretion of potassium. So control of both the electrical and the chemical gradient for potassium movement across the luminal membrane is what determines potassium secretion and therefore what determines potassium excretion. So intratubular potassium concentration is determined by the entry of potassium on the peritubular side of the cell, largely by the action of the sodium-potassium ATPase. The movement of potassium across the luminal wall from cell into tubule will be increased if more potassium channels insert into the membrane, increased if the lumen becomes more negative, and increased if the lumen potassium concentration gets reduced, which will therefore increase the overall diffusion gradient. Aldosterone is the major physiologic controller of potassium excretion. Aldosterone is made in the adrenal gland, and it's released into the plasma in response to a number of signals. We talked about how it controls sodium balance and how it's released in response to volume depletion. But another signal, which has nothing to do with sodium balance, is plasma potassium. And when plasma potassium increases, that also releases aldosterone into the circulation. Aldosterone promotes the entry of potassium into the cells, into all cells, but including the principal cells, by stimulating the sodium-potassium ATPase. So it increases the intracellular concentration of potassium. It causes opening of more of the luminal potassium channels, making it easier for potassium to move from cell into the lumen. It also increases the lumen negativity because it stimulates ENaC, which stimulates sodium reabsorption in the collecting duct, which makes the lumen more negative. Of note, people with hyperaldosteronism all have hypokalemia. And that's because the kidney does not escape from the potassium wasting actions of high aldosterone, and that's in contrast to the natriuretic actions, where you see escape after a few days. Other things that regulate the principal cell potassium concentration, an increase in plasma potassium causes potassium to enter all cells, including the principal cells, under the action of insulin, beta-adrenergic agonists, and aldosterone. Something that's not related to potassium homeostasis can also cause increased cellular potassium. If hydrogen ion concentration outside the cell falls, hydrogen ion will leave the cell and the potassium ion will enter. This will occur everywhere in the body, including the principal cells. So when body fluids become alkaline, the concentration of potassium in the principal cells increases, which increases potassium excretion. Conversely, when the body fluids become acid, potassium leaves the cell and potassium excretion decreases. So we have a situation where potassium excretion is changing, but not as part of potassium homeostasis, as a secondary, unwanted response to an attempt to control acid-base balance. There are other ways of increasing potassium secretion by making it easier for potassium to move from the cell into the lumen, and one is the presence of non-reabsorbable anions. Phosphate, sulfate, and sometimes bicarbonate cannot be reabsorbed in the collecting duct, and their presence makes the lumen more negative, which pulls potassium out of the cell. Anything that increases tubule flow rate will reduce the rate of rise of intratubular potassium concentration as potassium is being secreted into the lumen, and this enhances the diffusion gradient from the cell to the lumen. So during a diuresis, when ADH levels are low, you will see an increase in potassium excretion. And the diuretics, furosemide and thiazide, will also increase tubule flow through the collecting duct, and this contributes to their potassium wasting effect. So to summarize, remember, most of the potassium is inside the cell, only 2% is extracellular, and we really can't tell anything about total body potassium content just by looking at plasma potassium. It's very critical that the distribution of potassium between the inside and outside of the cell is maintained, because this determines the membrane potential. Hyperkalemia will depolarize nerve and muscle, and hypokalemia will hyperpolarize nerve and muscle, and this can cause life-threatening changes within minutes. So over the short term, the regulation of plasma potassium is by insulin, adrenergic receptors, and aldosterone, and these control the amount of potassium distributed between the inside and outside of the cell, and thus regulate membrane potential. But there are also situations where pathologic changes can occur, and one example I gave you is when there's a change in acid-base balance. The kidney overall controls the total amount of potassium in the body. Most of the potassium that's filtered is always reabsorbed in the proximal tubule and thiccae sending limb, so filtration of potassium doesn't control potassium excretion. Usually what controls potassium excretion is the amount secreted in the principal cells via those luminal ROM-K channels. The rate of potassium secretion is controlled by a number of factors, including the intracellular potassium concentration, the permeability of the membrane to potassium, how negative the lumen is, and the lumen potassium concentration. These will all control the rate of secretion of potassium by passive movement down its electrochemical gradient from cell into lumen. A major physiologic regulator is aldosterone. It's released in response to increased plasma potassium and will enhance potassium secretion and therefore potassium excretion by several mechanisms. The kidney is very flexible, and when potassium is deficient, it can switch from potassium secretion to potassium reabsorption in the collecting duct. This occurs in different cells in the intercalated cells and occurs via a luminal hydrogen-potassium ATPase. When acid-base balance changes, this can influence potassium excretion, and an example I gave you is that when the body fluids become alkaline, potassium secretion and therefore potassium excretion will increase. So during an alkalosis, that's when the body fluids are excessively alkaline, you will see excess potassium excretion and potassium depletion.